Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on patient group and industry partnering, and can this serve as a catalyst for new treatments? With me here is a fantastic and exciting panel of experts, each one of them bringing a different angle on the topic. So I'm very happy to introduce Sophie Muir, the chair of the Timothy Syndrome Alliance. Dr. Madhusudhan, Senior Business Manager at LifeArc. Julia Hawkins, who is a General Partner at LocalGlobe and a Trustee of Shwachman Diamond Syndrome UK. And Dr. Bruce Bloom, Chief Collaboration Officer at Healx, who is joining us from across the Atlantic. Good morning, Bruce. And my name is Dr. Ron Jortner. Everyone knows me by Ronnie. I'm a founder and CEO of Masthead Biosciences, and I'm also a trustee of the Cambridge Rare Disease Network. Let me give you, actually, first of all, let's have each of the panelists introduce very briefly, like in 1 minute, their relation to the rare disease field and their general angle on partnering with industry, partnering patient groups and industry. Sophie, why wouldn't you start?
Thank you. Hi, my name's Sophie. I registered TSA as a charity in the UK in 2019 after my son had a 10-year odyssey, and we found that we had a Catalyse related disorder. We are trying to improve diagnosis, treatment and care of families with Catalyse related disorders, Timothy syndrome, long QT8, and support families.
Thank you. Madhu, can you go next?
Thank you, Ron. Yes, my name is Madhu. I am from a charity called LifeArc, a self-funded research charity. Focusing on translating early stage medical research to the clinic using advice, science, and funding. My particular role is focusing on delivering a comprehensive advice and support service on all aspects of research translation and impact, including IP commercialization. And more specifically, I sit alongside the philanthropy funded team headed by Katrina Crombie, where we help support translational research, academic research projects in the rare disease space.
Thank you. Julia, can you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Hawkins. I'm the trustee of SDS UK, Shwachman Diamond Syndrome UK. I'm also the general partner of an early stage investment fund based here in London called LocalGlobe, and our breakout fund called Latitude, where I focus on making investments into mostly health tech companies. My journey to an investor in health tech actually stemmed from the fact that my daughter has a very rare disease called STS, which was the reason why I helped set up the charity. And I have played and am playing a very active role in both trying to set up the basic infrastructure to enable SDS to basically continue to do both academic as well as partnering with biopharma. I'm very happy to share more about the work that we've done to create a cure roadmap, which has been one of the main initiatives of our charity.
Thank you, Julia. Bruce.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Bloom. I am the Chief Collaboration Officer at Healx, a biotech headquartered in Cambridge that uses artificial intelligence to find therapies for rare disease. I have a 20-year history of being in the rare disease space, doing drug redevelopment and repurposing, also medical device repurposing, and both in the for-profit and not-for-profit realms. I spent 17 years as the CEO of a charity in the US called Cures Within Reach. We brought over a dozen therapies to patients by funding proof of concept clinical trials at academic centers and publishing the results so that physicians and patients could decide to use things off-label. And most of those successes were in the rare disease space. I currently work with probably between 50 and 80 rare disease organizations, and in my role as Healx, and I sit on several boards of rare disease organizations like Find a Cure, Mission Cure, and several others, and really very involved in this space. My nephew has Fragile X syndrome, and half a dozen people in my near-term family have rare diseases that we deal with.
Thank you very much. Before we delve into the discussion, let me give you a little bit of an introduction to what is motivating this topic now with us. And I'd like to share a presentation, a very brief one. Can everyone see this? So the motivation to this is that a lot of times we hear stories about how serendipity plays a huge role in finding new ways forward for rare diseases. And one hypothesise that came to us at CRDN was, can we catalyze treatment development for rare diseases through what we do best, which is create networks, link together, in this case, patient groups with companies in the right setting? Because a lot of these stories about serendipity are actually stories about a CEO of a company running into a parent in some unrelated setting, and as a result of this, you get a drug developed. And why can't this be systematized? Why can't these meetings that happen usually by chance be somehow structured and built, what I like to call systematic serendipity? And to this end, what we did at CRDN in May was run an inaugural event of patient group and industry partnering. We did this in May. And what we did was reach out to patient groups from our network, and a large majority of them were interested when they heard about the topic. We required each patient group to delegate 2 people, which is usually a patient advocate, the CEO, and 1 person with scientific or medical knowledge, such as a trustee. The idea was to have someone who understands patient needs and someone else who understands disease mechanism in depth. We required them to submit a detailed video pitch in preparation for their real pitch at the event. And that basically narrowed it down to 10 patient groups that fit all these criteria. Then with companies, we reached out to our own companies forum members, and all of them were, very surprisingly to me, all of them were interested, even though we required them to send, again, 2 delegates, one that would be management or advocacy, and one that would be with a more scientific or medical background. And the idea was, again, to have someone with decision-making capability together with someone who knows the compound library in depth. And that meant we had 10 patient groups and 11 companies. And these are the logos that you can see here. And it was a half-day event online. It was a short introduction and then back-to-back pitches for a whole hour, 5-minute pitches by the patient groups, following the guidelines that we gave them for the video pitch. And then there were 2 hours of speed dating, which is the innovative part of the whole thing. It was really literally 8-minute partnering slots, which they were both companies and patient groups were encouraged to prepare for in advance. They got a participant booklet with backgrounds. And that was followed by each time by a 2-minute debrief session where each team of meaning the 2 people from the patient group or the industry respectively, discussing internally on should we follow up on this, and also taking a little break from these meetings because this was intense. This was repeated 11 times so that everyone had met everyone else. And then there was a short networking to basically complete unfinished discussions and exchange contact details. And these were the responses we got from both sides. This is, you see things like opportunity, collaborative, engaging, exciting, but also mind-blowing and challenging because this was an intense event. And generally, the feedback had been very positive. So 95% of participants rated the overall event excellent or good. And you can see the breakdown of the different components of the event also received very good ratings. If you look at the quotes, there's a patient group there that says, we are actively following up with 5 companies that we were not in touch with before. So definitely a success. Now, the proof of this pudding will of course be in the eating. And the question is, what will happen, years down the line, how many treatments are going to come out of this? But for now, 4 months later, we're reviewing and we're seeing some good feedbacks. Now, this is prompting all this discussion on patient group and industry partnering. And Sophie, I'd like to turn to you. You were actually at this event as a patient group. Can you share some of your experience, and can you tell us what leads you formed, how many of them seem to be active, and what you've gotten out of it?
Loved it. Well worth doing. Tiring. Met some amazing people. And the opportunity to meet the rare diseases as well as the industry was of real benefit to me to understand where we were. There were opportunities where I would never have met 2 people representing an industry, being a small charity that we are. I think I've connected with everybody from the day, because we're not yet in the therapeutic side. We're very much concentrating on diagnosis because we've only got 100 families worldwide. There were some relationships that haven't gone anywhere, but that doesn't mean that they're not relationships that we will reach out to in the future and I will learn from, and I now know more about them and what they're doing. We have 3 ongoing, nearly 4th, that are active, all with regard to diagnosis and raising awareness. And I've met other people through the links that we met on the day. So it was, yeah, for us as a small charity, a rare disease, trying to reach out, it was a super day.
Thank you. Madhu, LifeArc were also present, although you yourself were not. But can you tell us a bit about what LifeArc had gotten out of this event, or about similar partnering that you've had with patient groups?
Yes, no, thank you. I think I mirror everything that Sophie said in terms of, and again, as Ron said, excuse me, Katrina attended the event, and so I had a catch up with her after we met, Ron, and so out of the 12 or so, I think Katrina managed to speak to on the day, I think about half of them followed up with us, and we did, and out of which, I think at the moment we are having ongoing conversations with about 3 of them. So the 3 charities, and you see, I think one of the things that Sophie mentioned is also quite critical. I think it depends on what part of the journey that they are on. Is it diagnoses, where they are in that whole, because we as LifeArc focus on the translational part of things. And so if there is a right fit there, and quite surprisingly, 5 of them had, and the 2 really were not right at the moment. But as you say, it's about sowing the seed and then wait for it to kind of fructify at some point. So in short, I think, and I'm quoting Katrina here, it was useful. We came away with quite a few contacts, all of whom were keen to kind of pursue it further. We've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 who want to, explore whether we could take it further and collaborate either through funding or through other collaborative initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you. Julia, I turn to you. You were not at this event, but on the other hand, you wear 2 different hats, both of which partner each with another side. So as both the investor side and as the patient group side, could you give us your experience maybe about partnering both with patient groups and with industry from your angle, and what you see there?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about, I guess, where SDS is in terms of its journey. So it is a very rare disease. There are about 50 patients in the UK, about 300 patients in the US, although poorly diagnosed because there are actually 150 patients in France. affects many different organs, as well as leads to oftentimes cognitive impairment. Now, where we are as a disease is actually there are two academic groups that are working on different therapies. There's a small molecule approach in Cambridge. There's a base editing approach at Boston Children's Hospital. There's actually a repurposing program in Italy. So despite the relative rarity of our condition, in some ways, we are very fortunate because we have world-leading academics that are looking at this condition. We've also actually been able to attract venture capital funding. So Medici, David Granger has actually invested in the small molecule approach in Cambridge. And actually, as a result of attending an event, and I guess it was one of these serendipitous occasions, I was invited to speak on a panel in Israel, which was hosted by Ultragenics. I got to know the Ultragenics team, and as a result, they are also exploring a gene therapy approach in Boston. So I think, I guess on a macro level, I absolutely believe that it's fundamental for patient groups to be partnering, whether it be with the academics that are doing some of the very early preclinical work and supporting them to the best of their abilities. And then I also believe that obviously partnering with biopharma unlocks greater potential for capital, whether it be in our instance, obviously having Medici putting their name to SDS. For me, I felt like we'd won the jackpot. I was so excited about that. And then also having had the fortune of now working with Ultragenics. But I think, at the end of the day, as a patient group, I think you have to also be able to take things into your own hands. And I think the things that we're doing, so for example, we call it biotech ecosystem readiness, and in that bucket, we're creating a basically registry and tissue bank. We're creating mouse models and other animal models. We're taking the lead on writing the clinical trial protocol, which will be used in all clinical trials going forward. And this was actually something that David Granger at Medici asked us to do because he thinks that we're in a unique position to be able to do that. And then over time, we will also raise money to be able to explore other avenues that have not been explored by either academics or biotechs. Because, me both as a mother and as an investor, I understand that I want a portfolio. I want many shots on goal. And in order to do that, we basically need to have the resources as well as the capability in order to do that. So I guess, wearing my investor hat, I guess that the way that I apply my thinking to this rare disease is that I want to make sure that as many people know about it as possible, number one, and number two, I want to make sure that it is well capitalized and well funded. That takes some creativity, and I guess that's where I'm excited about learning more about the likes of LifeArc and also about the programs, the excellent programs that Healx have been championing.
Thank you. And this leads us directly to Bruce. Bruce, your bread and butter is partnering with the patient groups, and also you've told me so much about your experience from beforehand. Could you give us some examples of your experience of partnering between patient groups and industry?
Sure. I have quite a few of them. I would say, so let me just tell you the sort of currently what Healx is doing, and then I'll go backwards into some of the ones that I can experience. So Healx is a biotech that uses existing drugs and artificial intelligence to create new therapies for rare diseases. And as many other pharmaceutical companies, we think it's critical to have the patient voice and the rare disease community voice as part of our drug development from the very beginning. Even as far as what kinds of diseases we might work on and how we might work on them, and what are the important things to look for in designing therapies for patients, getting the patient voice in there. And I'll tell you a story about one of the diseases that I worked on when I was at Cures Within Reach, and we had received some proposals for some drug repurposing, and we went to a patient group to talk to them about it. And this is, much like Shwachman-Diamond syndrome and others. It's a really multi-symptom, very challenging disease with lots of things that you could work on. And what we heard from the parents was the thing they were most concerned about was making sure their child slept through the night, even though child had cognitive issues and GI issues and mobility issues and many other things. Because the family was so devastated that the child was up every night, which meant the parent was up every night, and the whole family was, in a state of, perpetual tiredness, the most important thing to them. And that was not something that either the company or the researchers were focused on. And so if you don't get the patient voice in at the very beginning, you can head off in a path that might look commercially viable or good from a research standpoint, but it's not really helping the community that needs it most. And that was a wake-up call for me. I would never have thought that, both the research community and the commercial community didn't sort of understand what they needed to in order to do the best work for the patients in that particular rare disease community. And so we've carried that in at Healx to try and have multiple relationships with disease groups as much as we can from the very beginning. And it becomes more and more critical as we progress a drug disease combination along the pipeline and get close to clinical trials. Then it's really important, because understanding how to structure a clinical trial that works best for the patient group is really, really important. And if you don't do that, then you end up with a whole different set of issues that it's sometimes very difficult or too late to manage as you're getting close to the clinic. So that's kind of how we look at things at Healx. But if I think about going backwards, patient groups have been the drivers of so many successes in the things that we have done. And the patient advocates like Julia and Sophie, many of whom are parents of children with rare diseases, but not always. Sometimes the advocates are non-family members. I worked in a disease years ago where the driving force was the best friend of the mother of a child with a rare disease. And the parents were so overwhelmed with taking care of the children, they didn't really have time to have a full-time job taking care of a special needs patient, and then another full-time job being the head of a patient group. And so this young woman sort of took this on as her second full-time job and helped raise over $1 million over a 2-year period to help a company and an academic do a gene therapy program and get that running. And it was just incredibly helpful. And without those funds, never would have gotten the project started. So that's sort of a big success story, but there's also a lot of smaller success stories. And sometimes they're driven by individuals. Many of you may know Amber Freed. She's a mom in the US. Her son Maxwell has SLC6A1 as a gene that's perturbed, and it causes eventual neurodegeneration. It's kind of a race against time. These kids grow up and they are seemingly normal, and then their gene accumulation issues cause them to degenerate. And she's been sort of a one-person whirlwind running around the entire globe, mostly virtual over the last couple of years, and just created some amazing things. And there was just an article in the paper about her convincing Horizon Pharmaceuticals to offer the drug for free a drug that's very expensive and is approved in one disease and could be utilized in several other rare diseases. And now that's moving along. She and several other parent advocates. It's just amazing to see these people who have no healthcare and commercial background become world experts in the disease. And they may not be as deep as a researcher or somebody, but they're more broad. They understand from soup to nuts, and they're incredible resources for both the academic research and the commercial community. And it's really important. And I'm personally supporting a couple of people right now in my free time who will be the future Amber Freeds of their particular rare genetic disease. And it's really great to be able to help.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're leading me directly into a question about what patients need. And, you know, we all can imagine that the holy grail for many patient groups in entering a collaboration with a company would be probably a cure or a treatment. But maybe that's not all, and maybe that's not always the case. I would be curious to hear from Julia and from Sophie in turn. What is it that you're looking to get from a collaboration? And are there things beyond a treatment option or a cure that would be important for you as additional goals, or as maybe even more important goals in a way, more attainable?
I'm happy to go first, and I think this also answers one of the questions that was in the chat, which was around how, as new under-resourced patient groups can make these steps forward that you have. Is the first step a really gripping awareness-raising campaign, or something, or a combination of many ingredients? And I'm going to answer that as well as your question, because I think the starting point for any patient-facing organization, I think, has to be around getting to know who the patients and who the families are. And so I mean, that was the very first step that we took before we even started to make contact with any, with even the academics, as well as the clinicians or any of the researchers, or any kinds of partnership conversations. We first started to build our community, and we did that by reaching out to the parents. We organized a family day. We have since set up a WhatsApp group for all patients. We've got obviously a Facebook group, but actually our WhatsApp community is the most effective. We've surveyed all of our families to understand what their main concerns are and what they would like us to focus on. And I think there are, you know, I think it's very apparent that in our community, the biggest concern is that in between 20 to 25 to 35% of cases, children go on to develop leukemia in their 20s. And when this happens, there are actually no treatments. And so most parents are living in fear of this happening. And actually, this has been one of the biggest concerns that have been raised by our community. There are also actually more structural problems, which is when the patients go from the pediatric care to a much less structured adult care. And we've been working to try to support that, and actually to create a multidisciplinary adult care clinic, for example. And so I guess what we look for now that we're in the stage where we're actually actively both raising money to improve how care is delivered, but actually also looking for treatment partners. I think for us, that the main thing that we look for is, have these potential partners worked on a similar disease before? What has their success rate been? What is the caliber of the academics that we're working with, or that we have the potential to work with? I basically do a very similar referencing that I would do in my job as an investor.
Thank you.
My
Thank
turn.
you.
I would say, the Holy Grail is way out of reach at the moment. We are concentrating on raising awareness to find the families that have the gene change. It's Unless you fit in a particular part of the CACNA1C gene and it comes up as long QT8 or Timothy syndrome, you are generally an N=1, which means you're a variant of unknown significance because there's been no paper written about it. There's no answers. You've got all these phenotypes coming together, and what I'm trying to create is this awareness of the CACNA1C gene and the range of symptoms within, which can range from cardiac, got developmental disorders, ADHD, we've got epilepsy, hypoglycemia, that's my doorbell. So everything is focused on there, and it's raising the awareness to everyone to be able to acknowledge that this is something that needs addressing, that needs looking at, it needs research, but unfortunately without the papers, nobody is taking an interest. Without the papers is evidence, because the researchers, the clinicians, the HCPs need the papers to be able to go further with that.
Thank you. Madhu, I'm going to ask you, what do you think makes some patient groups more successful than others in partnering?
And I have to come back to that original point of what stage they are, but I think the fundamental thing is what you see, say, for example, Julia and Sophie here, is that I think it's generally the rising influence of patients and persistence, and the way I have seen they go about it, actually knocking on doors, trying to find out. And as Bruce said, you meet people that are so inspiring that in spite of not having the right background, etc., in terms of academic, so we find that those we can help the most are those who understand exactly the points that were raised earlier, which is what stage of the journey they are in, and understanding that as bad as it might sound, the way Sophie sort of made it in terms of a cure. So what is it that gives them an immediate benefit? And Bruce touched upon that earlier as well, the patient organization that understands that, okay, we need, for example, one of them that we worked with, Deborah, I mentioned this earlier to you, Ron, is that the requirement of a liquid formulation is something that only a patient can tell you. I can't swallow the pill. So you need to first develop that. The need for academic kind of the papers, anything that requires. So the ones that really make progress are the ones who understand that by any means available to them. And this is through talking and understanding and creating awareness, etc. And active participation in the decision making, actually understanding the preferences and working out a way that sort of works. Say, for example, if they come to us, we can only do funding, but at the same time, we do a lot of mentoring in terms of building up applications to make sure that they have a higher chance of getting through the panel. So that, and it works both ways. We learn as well in that process. So the patient insight that is brought in helps us to decide what is best. And it is those patient networks who've done their homework to understand and answer these questions that I think would become a perfect partner. And to be fair, for the patient networks and groups, I guess it is also a learning curve, sometimes quite steep. And I think one of the things I've come back with and always remember is that time moves differently for patient groups, and therefore the kind of perseverance you see is actually quite inspiring.
Thank you. Bruce, I'm going to turn the same question to you. What, from your experience, makes some patient groups more successful in partnering than others?
Ronnie, thanks for that question. And I want to start by saying every patient group I've ever dealt with is successful in some way. And the burden that we place on parents who are carers to also be advocates for their kids and the leads in patient groups is immense and I think unfair. And even with all of that, people rise to the occasion and do that. And I've had a lot of patient groups that I've interacted with who are not focused on driving immediately to a therapy for their child, but they're more interested in finding ways that families can connect with each other for more psychosocial support, finding ways to make sure that the children that are affected are getting as good holistic care as they can, because for many of these kids, unfortunately, they're not going to survive long enough for us to generate a treatment, but that doesn't mean they can't have the highest quality of life they deserve for the condition that they're, in right now. And so we have to be careful when we say what makes one patient group, better to work with or more easy to work with. From an industry standpoint, if your goal is to create a therapy, patient groups that have figured out how to gather data, models, research networks, clinical networks, put together registries, understand the natural history, done quality of life. There's all sorts of things you can do. And at Healx, we've done a series of webinars to help patient groups understand the importance of each of these things. And I think Madhu and Julia and Sophie all talked about the importance of creating a network, ringing doorbells, picking up the phone, being, unstoppable when it comes to asking for what you need. And, luckily, I feel like the majority of the research community, the patient support community, and even the commercial community is open to hearing from people in the rare disease space. There's at least 7,000 and probably more rare diseases. Many of them are these ultra rare diseases where there's dozens or hundreds of families that are affected, and they deserve the same kind of support as anybody else. And so I do think Madhu hit it on the head. People that are really invested in the disease and learn enough to be able to communicate at all levels, at the commercial level, the research level, the clinical level, the funding level, seem to have the most success raising money, getting people working on their disease and moving things forward. But that's not the only measure of success that's out there.
If I can just add to that, sorry, Ron, I think, and as an extension to that, the fundamental theme of what you've raised today is to say that anything that can be done to create that, as those in the middle, for example, us as LifeArc, CRDN, Find a Cure, whoever it is, organizations, to do more of that, to actually enable and help everyone, I think would go a long way in actually making that happen, I think.
Thank you all. I'm going to ask another question, but before that, I'd like to remind our audience, it's not actually a remind because I didn't actually say that before, but please post questions. So I'd like to devote the last at least 10 minutes of our panel to answering your questions. Drop them either in the Q&A, which is best, because then we don't have to chase them up, or in the chat, and I will field them to our panelists, or they will take them themselves. In the meantime, let's take another question. So, what is the thing that you need most from a partner? Let's say, Sophie, what is the most important thing that you need from an industry partner that would make you favor that partner over another? And what is the thing you're looking most to get, like not as an end goal, but during the collaboration? What is the property of the partner that makes them the best partner?
That's a good one. I think, I mean, we're chasing hope. We're chasing the end of the rainbow, aren't we? And I think with any conversation, there's content within that conversation that you can then expand on. And so it's having that conversation anyway, and just establishing what the opportunities are within that conversation, and then not necessarily taking them up at the time if it doesn't work, but then coming back. So any conversation is a good conversation, even if it's not right for the moment. I think if you don't reach out and make those contacts, and contacts no contacts, and that's how it's working. And every time you speak to somebody new, you're raising awareness, you're increasing everybody's knowledge about, number one, the disorder. You're representing rare diseases as a whole, so you're speaking on behalf of everybody. You're representing the patients and the families that you have in your community, and you're just opening new doors, and it's keeping those doors open and not closing them behind you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Julia, could you answer from both perspectives? Like, what makes a patient a good partner for the industry or investor side, and vice versa?
I guess I don't actually invest in patient groups. I'm probably not the right person to ask what makes a good patient group. But I guess from what I have heard, or what I have witnessed, and if I also just hear what Madhu and what Bruce have been saying, not only is it obviously taking into account where the rare disease patient group is at in terms of their understanding of the science, but also an understanding of their goals. I think being maybe very, very clear about what it is that you are trying to achieve as a patient organization, and the kinds of partners that you're looking for. I think there is a difference in the types of partners that make sense, whether it's an academic partner, whether it's an investor, whether it's biopharma, or indeed whether it's a contractual partner that, for example, the rare disease patient group has raised money to build a mouse model, for example. And I think all of those, there are different qualities that you look for in a partner from the rare disease patient perspective.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'll ask the same question to Madhu. What do you seek from a partnership during the partnership? What is the property in a patient group that makes them a good partner to work with? Oh, you're on mute.
I've done it again. And I was just saying that, I think what Bruce said, just following on from the previous question, I think is quite right. I think there is no right and wrong here. I think it's about timing. And we have to understand that. I think some of the things that I have learned in the few years is that the ecosystem with rare disease is actually quite a different one. It's not the same as a conventional pharma industry situation. You're dealing with, and it was new to me also, as someone sitting in the middle, to be dealing with patient representatively, and be it for funding, be it for collaborations, being it for advice, for any of that sort. So communication, transparency, and I think the genuine interest in wanting to help, I think that really goes a long way. And I'm actually getting to what we are seeing and what we've been able to do to everyone that's approached us, either for funding or just for advice. And where we've been able to make the most difference is, again, dependent on where they are in the translational pathway. But also, I think the ability to sit in the middle and see a whole range of people and put them together. I know somebody who knows somebody. I think that is it. And sometimes that unlocks more doors than anything else. And then they come back. So the timing might not be right. And so a lot of the partners, if I can call them that, who are coming back to us were people we spoke to in 2011, 13, 14. Because they've moved along the way, they've discovered new things. As Sophie said, more academic papers have been published. And of course, the ecosystem has changed since the time, we all started this journey a few years ago in raising awareness, the power of the patient group, in exerting influence. So I think all of those have kind of affected the way everybody views not only patient groups, but also other stakeholders in the ecosystem, and the ability to work with everyone, I think, and to create a genuine collaboration. I think communication is the key, I think, to really understand each other's expectations, if you like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. we're starting to near the end. I have time for one more question. Why don't I ask, oh, wait, did we have another question pop up here? Oh no, that's a discussion, the last one. Bruce, I have another question for you then. Could you share a success story in this kind of partnering and a failure story? Briefly, because we're running short,
Sure.
and try to give maybe an insight to what made the success or what made the failure fail.
So the success story that I'll tell you about is a disease called familial dysautonomia. And there's a group of parents that got a patient group started, and they found one lab that was willing to work with them. And over a short period of time, they went from not knowing what caused this disease to finding the gene and beginning to start on some therapeutics, all of which are repurposed nutraceuticals. So no need to go through the FDA. And what made it especially great was the partnership between the patient group, the academic researcher that was going to do the work, and a series of nutraceutical manufacturers, so industry, who all got together and made sure that the purity and the sourcing and everything. So these kids, for about $1,000 a year, now have a combination of about 9 nutraceuticals that either upregulate a gene or change protein folding or do some amazing things, and they're surviving. And it was just great. Everybody was willing to do their part. And I would say a failure that I'll call in quotation marks. So Horizon worked on a Friedreich's ataxia project a few years ago, and they got to a phase 3 clinical trial, and the patient group had been very important and part of it. And unfortunately, the end result of the phase 3 trial was they didn't reach their marks and the endpoints. But a lot of the parents of the kids felt that there was some improvement. But one of the things that I think stops some of these collaborations is not really having a measurable endpoints in some of these diseases where you can definitively say that the drug has helped, where the people living with the kids on a day-to-day basis can automatically tell. My nephew was in a Fragile X study once, and he was on the therapy, which ended up getting not approved and not continued. And we all saw changes in him. Many of us saw it, and we didn't know he was on a clinical trial. And we would say to his mom, "What's with Alex? He's like making greater eye contact, and he's staying in the situation, and he's not rocking back and forth." But again, it didn't meet the measurable endpoints. And so I think sometimes the companies and the patient groups do a great job of working together, and just we don't have a system set up to push those things across the finish line in a way that can benefit patients.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. We have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give each of you 30 seconds to make a final statement. Sophie, why don't you go first? 30 seconds.
30 seconds. If you see a post about a rare disease on social media, share it, because you don't know who's watching. You don't know who's going to find that message. It can signpost somebody back for support and for care and for diagnosis. So yeah, just share everything you find, because we're all trying to find the answers, and unless you can find the people, you don't have a bigger community for research to take the interest. So we have to find the people. Share. That's me.
Thank you. By the way, your clock is 10 minutes early, and it scared me several times.
That's so the kids get to school on time.
Yes. Julia, you're next.
I guess I'd just like to say, if you're a parent of a child with a rare disease and you feel completely overwhelmed, you don't know where to start, all I can say is start small, find your peers, find other parents, come together as a community, and then from there, bit by bit, build your community of academics, clinicians, and from there, things will snowball. I promise you. Don't take on too much. Do what you can, and know that everything is actually within your reach, and really believe that you can do it.
Thank you. Madhu, you go next.
Yeah, I think I just have to echo what Sophie said, actually. I think it's creation of awareness to the extent that is possible and beyond. And also the affirmation that there is help out there now. I think it's a matter of really looking and persisting, which is what I think most patient groups do, and I've seen that. So I think there's help out there, LifeArc included, although in a sort of a limited area, including funding. But it's to keep trying. I think that's the message. I think.
Thank you, Madhu. Bruce, 30 seconds.
Great. I'll echo what Madhu just said. If I was a patient advocate, I would say I always have to ask. If I don't ask, the answer is no. So ask, and don't be afraid to ask for what you need, and ask for even crazy things that somebody might be able to do for you. You never know when someone will say yes. And the last thing I want to say is, you know, most people's heroes are celebrities or sports people or politicians or great writers or actors. I think rare disease advocates, especially parents who are carers and patients, are my heroes. The perseverance that they show, and the emotional stability and the joy that they bring to our worlds. I just admire that, and I'm glad to be part of the community, and really grateful for everybody that shared their story with me.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists for your time and for sharing your stories and your insights and your experience. I want to thank all the audience for being here. I want to thank my colleagues at CRDN for organizing this whole event and for putting this together. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.